Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to theCUBE's live coverage of Red Hat Summit Ansible Fest 2025 here at the Boston Convention Center. I'm your host, Rebecca Knight, sitting alongside my co-host and analyst, Rob Strechay. I love it when guests bring treats.
Of course.
Yes, and stickers for
they know.
Exactly.
I was going to say
new one.
Yeah.
I get it. That is.
You're a control freak, or I'm not a control freak. You're just doing it wrong. So these are actually
very good
for you too. So very good.
Very good.
So with that, I would like to introduce our next guest. We have Margaret Dawson, CMO and open source evangelist at Chronosphere. Welcome, Margaret.
Thank you so much.
And Bill Hineline, field CTO at Chronosphere. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Love it.
So we're talking observability, which is not new. It's been around for a while, but obviously the way software gets built has changed.
Yep.
So Margaret, I want to start with you to talk us through why this is just give us some broad brush strokes about why it's so much more complex now.
Yeah, and it's perfect that we're talking about this at the Red Hat Summit. And I should shout out that I worked at Red Hat for many, many years. And so I'm a huge OpenShift, Kubernetes, Ansible fan, RHEL. And really everything OpenShift talks to is exactly what we're talking about, right? When we're building modern applications, we are building them using containers, microservices architecture, and all of that makes more complexity even as we want to simplify and put things in the cloud. And it also creates a lot of telemetry data. And so all that data you're creating, so hopefully if something goes wrong, you can see what it is. What is the issue? Why is my performance down? Or why did my application stop? And it's become harder and harder to wade through all of that data and really see what's going on. And so what we did was build for that environment specifically and make it super easy to control the amount of data you're putting into it and see what's wrong.
Yeah, I look at it, and again, this is a space that I love. I think that, getting control over the data in particular is a big thing. I think that one of the big pieces is that APM has been around for a long time.
Yep.
There's a lot of open source underneath modern observability. They kind of are coming together, but why don't we jump in, and why doesn't APM really work?
Oh, great question.
In this space? And because you have it, you were the customer. You were there living this every day. We actually know each other from that past life. So, it's kind of helping people understand your perspective on that.
Well, I think that it sort of goes into what Margaret was saying about how the world has changed and the way applications are developed and where they live is evolved. And so with that, the APM world, we had agents. People like me who ran observability loved the fact that it was easy to deploy. You could deploy it without having to ask the developer more than how much downtime can I take to deploy an agent. But now we have infrastructure that's ephemeral. It lasts for seconds and not weeks, months, days, whatever. And so that complicated things. You have to build telemetry into your code. And we talk a lot with customers about being a first-class citizen with observability, similar to what we all went through with cyber several years ago, right? When CISOs were trying to get the developers to think about security when they're writing code in the first sprint, we encourage that similarly as they're developing. Start with your telemetry early, right? But the reason that APM doesn't work the way it used to anymore is, number one, those agents can't exist the way they used to. And secondly, we're generating so much more data that it's a scale problem for a lot of those APM solutions that existed.
And there's things like Prometheus and OpenTelemetry and a lot of other things that act as the agent as well.
There are.
And you've got a lot of the companies that were early cloud, early Kubernetes, were the companies like DoorDash and, Affirm, Robinhood, kind of these cloud native, companies. And they never even tried APM. A lot of them just started building their own using open source tools. And then they found, do we really need to be managing that? So it's kind of follows the same path as you've seen with other industries where those early adopters turn first to open source, they try to do it themselves, and then there's a point where it's like, okay, we should be managing our own application that's mission critical and bring in something that can do that. But the old APM solutions couldn't, it broke. The scale, the complexity, right, and just the nature of cloud native applications just didn't work with the legacy technology.
So piggybacking on that for a second, what, in your view, defines a modern observability strategy? I mean, where does it live within an organization, and what should teams and senior leaders prioritize it?
Start?
Yeah, I think to me, when I talk to customers a lot about observability strategy, and it starts with just that, a strategy. People, self-included, have fallen in love with tools over the years and start tool first and then strategy, and that always winds up a mistake. But a good strategy has some obvious things like tool requirements, but observability needs to underpin your business, right? And so thinking about what's the value I'm driving. Telemetry is huge. We collect a lot, so that telemetry needs to drive a value. And so that starts with what's the business value I'm trying to gain from putting in observability to begin with, right? Then it's about scoping your telemetry, all sorts of technical requirements for tools and things like that, a culture of observability, getting people to treat it like a first-class citizen, like we talked about before. But then also, how do you get people to really use the tool every day? That's really that observability culture.
And I think it's starting to change. It reminds me a little bit of FinOps, where it started in the engineering, right? Because who went to cloud first? Engineers started building cloud. They started using their credit card with AWS or whatever, right? Because they could. And those are the same engineers that realized this is really hard and I can't now see what's going on. The old tools we were using aren't working. And so platform engineers, cloud infrastructure, those same teams are kind of becoming the place where cloud native observability is living. And then it's starting to evolve from there. So in the enterprise, it's interesting. The CIO isn't always involved. It's usually a business unit that's kind of pushing the forefront of modern applications. Maybe they're building a new containerized app and the rest of the organization is behind. So I think we'll see that same evolution where it starts in engineering. You're seeing the arrival of SREs and some other roles that are involved. And then the more mature companies have a center of excellence, just like with FinOps or just like with other things where there's a central team that is running observability. But that's really very mature. I think what you're seeing in most enterprises is it starts wherever they're containerizing, wherever they're doing their application modernization, and then it moves towards, more of the office of the CTO or CIO, depending on the company.
And I would add to that I think you also have to really think about something that people think of as not too sexy or really technical at all, but it's organizational change management, which everybody rolls their eyes about.
I think it's very sexy.
But when you're
anyway.
But when you're trying to get people to do something like observability, it's similar to, I think, the reaction that CISOs got. Again, back to the comparison with security. It's like, here they come again. I got that look a lot. Here he comes again. He's got another tool or another process. So it's got to be, how are we going to do this? Why is it important to them? And how is it going to make my life better?
You guys are losing pain.
Yeah.
Right? Where's the pain? Because it's one of those people at 3 a.m., if you've been there, a lot of us have been, where you're on that call at 3 a.m. trying to figure out why something's down, right? That's where it starts.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's dead on. I think, again, we talked about this, chatted about this a little before we went on here, that the persona, to your point about SREs, DevOps, now platform engineering was all the rage at KubeCon. Like, you could not go anywhere in London without talking. I know there's a lot of different tracks here. What are you seeing from a persona perspective as you go out? Because even at your previous employer and stuff like that, there were different silos within different business units and
absolutely
nature.
I think there are several things changing. Number one, SRE is becoming more of a common thing.
Yeah.
That was a advanced sort of feature for a lot of companies for a while, although there were probably people doing it. They didn't have a formal role. I also think the central observability team is changing. In the APM world, they were more of the doers. In the observability world, they're the enablers, right? They build the platform, they build the governance, they build the foundational starting points for teams, but it's embracing that. And it's becoming, the whole practice is becoming something that's not just for, nerds like me sitting in a data center, that's for even up to the business. If I'm a product owner, I care about observability. If I'm a CIO or a CFO making significant tech investments, I care about observability, right? So it's that maturity is starting to take hold.
I think you see a lot of alignment with DevOps, because even in our platform, there's kind of the operations side or the admin side and the developer side. So you've got to have that collaboration. I like to say Dev Ollie Ops, because we say Ollie for observability, because I do think it is the bridge between the developer and operations, like many things are, because the admin, like you were saying, wants to know the cost, wants to set the rules, wants to know how much data are we actually trying to process or use for visibility, and the devs just want to get shit done. Yeah. Right. And so we have that same tension. Hopefully we're enabling both of them to see the same data, to understand what's going on so they can solve problems and keep moving and innovating.
So speaking of tension, what is the danger of collecting too much data? And how do you decide what to keep? How do you decide what to edit out?
We should come up with a really good analogy. I was trying to think of, how like you have those jars with all the marbles in it, and you try to guess how many marbles you can ever do it. Right, it kind of feels like that. But the danger is twofold. One is that think of all this data being ingested. I mean, tens of millions of active time series, or, terabytes and terabytes of logs. And there's two problems. One is that you ingest all that. What are you paying for? So that's the first question I'll ask you. The second thing is, are you wading through all that data to try to figure out what's wrong? And how is it organized, right? What do you have visibility? So there's two dangers in that. And so what we have done literally is control both of those things. So you still ingest all the data, but then we use tools and algorithms to say, okay, what really gets used? We have utility scoring. We have all this cool stuff. And we use your business rules to determine, 80% of this or more is not needed. Like, that's not going to help you understand what's going on, right? So you can archive it, you can put it in cheap storage, whatever, but there's a huge cost and data noise advantage to that. And then the signal to noise ratio, goes down significantly, so you can have these clear signals, and then we can run really smart machine learning and algorithms against that to say, we think it's this, right? And that's what we do.
I think it's about plus 200 with everything that
200. That's the best I've ever gotten from you.
But I think it's also about changing the behavior in the back end too. Mm-hmm. We all, again, myself included, grew up in a collect everything and we'll sort it out.
Yeah.
And we're finding that doesn't work. It doesn't work on multiple reasons. Cost, it creates a big noise to signal ratio, and it just winds up being a lot of false alarms that make your entire investment look like a waste because people lose trust in it. So I think looking at it and being intentful with what that's a word.
Intentional,
yes. Thank you.
We can use intent.
We're crowning it today. But intentional about why you're picking a metric instead of shopping for them. And as I work with development teams, I would say, think about something simple. Start way up here and ask yourself, why does this exist? Why did this app get developed? And what are the 5 or 10 features that are either most popular or most important from a revenue or customer experience or whatever? And build SLOs and error budgets around those. And then you've got suddenly a foundation to think about, what do I need to collect?
Yeah. It's interesting. We did a recent survey and people said alert fatigue is one of their biggest pain points around observability, because you're just getting pinged all the time. So how do you figure out what's actually wrong, or, is it just noise?
And then you create the distrust.
Yeah.
Correct.
And if you don't trust it, nobody's going to use it.
You ignore it when it's bad. It's like crying wolf.
Well, it's the ignoring it. It's because then it's like, oh, well, we always get that at this time.
Correct.
I'll say, well, why aren't we checking on it? But that goes back to like the whole data collection strategies, right? And you said this, and I think this goes back to the organizational fit with that. What are some things that you've seen work for customers about that? Like helping them, like you were saying, hey, focus on the top 5 features within your mobile app that does mobile ticketing or something of that nature. What are some of those data collection strategies that you've seen and you've kind of helped people like motivate in that direction?
People get into it and they get overwhelmed. They get FOMO, and I think that they don't think about golden signals. The 4 golden signals are great starting points for every application, right? And then you build on them, right? And that's where I think the central observability team, if you're an org that is lucky enough to have one created, can give that guidance and governance to say, here's sort of a starter kit, right? Start with the golden signals of latency, saturation, error, and I'm blanking on the last one. Latency, saturation, error, and traffic, right? And making sure that you're collecting those, because out of those 4, you're going to collect a lot of insight into how your app is performing, and then build on that. But don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to collect everything. Be intentional. or intentful.
Yeah. I mean, this is why we also can show data to see what you're using. So it's amazing when we work with customers, we'll say, okay, let's run the utility against this. Right? Say, okay, no one is querying anything against this data. There are no dashboards being created about this data. Like literally the utility score is 0. And someone can say, oh, but that service seems really important. It's not. Like there's nothing happening. Like sure, it's important in terms of being up, but we can literally get rid of that. Right.
And it gives the central observability team, the SRE, whoever is answering to the cost of observability at some point, great conversation data points for that conversation with a developer who is experiencing FOMO, who said, I need 10,000 metrics for this app. They can come back and say, well, we see you're using 5. And so and be able to support that and coach and help them and guide them.
Yeah, and the credibility.
Build them the credibility, the confidence.
Exactly.
And even better, be able to address it right then without having to redeploy.
Yeah.
So looking ahead, what is next for observability, especially as AI is maturing? I want to hear both of you on this. Margaret, I'll start with you.
I think there's a couple things. One is just the continuation of scalability that we haven't seen. The one thing AI does is even multiply exponentially this data issue. And what I will say is we are currently working with 2 of the largest LLM platforms in the world. And they had looked at a lot of different ways to solve this. And it's scalability and reliability that we have never seen, right? And how we're able to keep up is very exciting to me because this is the beginning, and so what we do within our own platform to support that kind of scalability and the need to be on all the time, right? I mean, we've been able to maintain 4 nines since we were founded, which is pretty much unheard of with that level of scalability, and complexity. So AI, both from, those kind of platforms, from the AI workloads that people are creating, for their own use, that's definitely there. I would say, for most enterprises, containerization is still somewhat early. So for those of us that have been in this world for a long time, it doesn't feel like it, but you still have a lot of companies that are maybe 10% containerized. So the future is, we are trying to help people with what's next, with where they are going and help them ride that Kubernetes containerization wave. And so that's a huge part of our future still.
I think AI is certainly the next big thing. I mean, it's here, right? We've got LLMs that have been popular for companies for several years now, and now we're just starting to see the amazing possibilities of agentic AI. And I think from our perspective, there's 2 things that we are really focused on. Number one, for those companies that are building their own models, and want to understand what's going on there, they care about 2 facets of that. They care about the underlying infrastructure that they put in, the GPUs and all of that. They also care about is my LLM hallucinating? What's the value of the tokens that I'm putting through there, and all of the metrics that you care about tuning an LLM workload. The great thing about it with observability is you can pull that all together and see, hey, why am I hallucinating so much? Or why is my prompt response time too high? And see immediately the correlated set of metrics that say you have GPU thermal shift or GPU contention or all of the metrics that, a company like NVIDIA cares about working through with you. So I think it's about answering those and helping people get that early before it gets out of control and, they start losing the value of that the LLM gives them.
I would add one thing that's a little bit different, which is just the business model of observability, I think, has got to shift. We vastly disrupted the market because you don't pay for everything you ingest. There's a lot of very complex licensing models out there. We attempted to vastly simplify it, which they are not motivated to do. Because, by the way, if your revenue is based on all the data that you ingest, and we're saying, no, just what you keep is what you pay for, that's a huge disruption. And just like everything went to consumption pricing, I think we're going to see a lot of pressure for observability overall to take a much more pragmatic approach, because I'll tell you, CFOs are now paying attention because observability bills are up there with your public cloud bill. And so when it becomes the number 2 most expensive IT you have, you've got to think about, is that the right approach from just a pure business model perspective? So
Great advice.
I said it the other day, if your CFO knows what observability is because of the cost and not the value,
Right.
you got to flip the script. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, on that, I'd like to thank you both, Margaret and Bill.
Thank you very much.
You have a really interesting conversation.
And shine your control freak. Let's see it on there.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
I'm Rebecca Knight for Rob Strechay. Stay tuned for more of theCUBE's live coverage of the Red Hat Summit Ansible Fest. You're watching theCUBE, the leader in enterprise tech news and analysis.